Imprisonment affords one considerable time for introspection, during which one may consider the nature of one's own actions. In my case, however, I found myself consumed by hatred. I reflected on my animosity towards my boss and my imminent estrangement from my spouse. My wife, Carol, and my own self-loathing for my actions contributed to my downfall. I am Michael Arnold, and when I say that I was foolish, I truly mean it. I was as foolish as the ignorant husband who was unaware of his wife's infidelity, which was with the person I held in the utmost contempt in my life, my boss, Jacob Sanders. Additionally, I was foolish because I was unaware that my wife was pregnant with his child. I foolishly believed that the child was mine. I believe my wife's pregnancy is the impetus for this discussion is my desire to provide context for the circumstances that have led to our current situation. It seems pertinent to provide a brief account of my history to contextualize the present. My earliest recollection of Jacob Sanders is from our first year of elementary school. It was during this period that I first encountered him and developed an animosity towards him that has persisted to this day. The catalyst for this animosity was Sanders' ridicule of my freckles. This incident marked the beginning of a long-standing enmity between us. The intensity of our conflict reached its zenith in our 8th year of schooling. On that occasion, I sustained injuries to my nose and eyes, while Sanders was left with a black eye and a bloody nose. On average, Jacob and I engaged in approximately 3 fights per year, with 3rd grade being the most tumultuous. In 8th grade, we only had 1 fight, which was precipitated by my decision to distance myself from Jacob. Despite my efforts to avoid him, he persisted in pursuing me. He was envious of my abilities and attempted to surpass me in various endeavors. In particular, he sought to outperform me in academics, particularly in science and literature. I, on the other hand, demonstrated greater proficiency in mathematics and history. Jacob and I were approximately equal in academic performance, with the exception of mathematics and history, in which he was more proficient than I. In sports, Jacob was a talented athlete, but I was slightly more skilled. However, if I participated in a sport, Jacob would play the same and attempt to defeat me. The physical altercation ceased after 8th grade, when Jacob realized he was unable to surpass me. He then resorted to humiliating me or getting me into trouble due to his actions. I was on the verge of expulsion and even arrested during my sophomore year. In the course of that year, an individual gained unauthorized access to the school premises and proceeded to deface the interior corridors. The investigating authorities subsequently discovered my student identification card in the vicinity of an empty receptacle for waste materials. I was subsequently exonerated from suspicion due to the fact that I had previously reported the loss of my ticket from my wallet. I was therefore able to identify Jacob as the perpetrator, as I had observed him on one occasion walking away from my locker after the conclusion of the practice session. I therefore decided to conduct a thorough examination of my belongings. I proceeded to inspect my wallet, first checking the cash and then the remaining contents. Upon discovering that my ticket was missing, I promptly sought assistance from the administrative office. Jacob, in turn, proceeded to utilize a device he had procured, which he placed on the desk I was occupying and activated. The resulting sound of a fart echoed throughout the classroom. Jacob then began to hold his nose and wave his hand. "Mike, what did you have for lunch?" he inquired, eliciting a response from the class. I responded with laughter, but I employed the tried-and-true strategy of attributing the incident to Jacob. This prompted further mirth from the class, which led Miss Wormwood to caution us that if Jacob and I persisted in disrupting the classroom, we would face detention. The fact that the teacher admonished us and then turned her attention to Jacob, eliciting a blush but no response, infuriated him. His attempts to have me expelled and even arrested were more the situation was, on the whole, annoying. I was not concerned about his superior status, I was comfortable with who I was. However, there was one area of concern: girls. We were both attractive, but Jacob's family was wealthy, which gave him an advantage over other boys at school. In the 11th grade, he received his own car, not an old jalopy. His parents purchased him a BMW Z4, which cost $50,000. I was unable to compete with her, as I was not as attractive as she was and therefore did not get as many dates. In contrast, Jacob dated cheerleaders and crowd girls, which I considered to be beyond my social standing. Therefore, I was not concerned about this. However, he was not satisfied with his success with the girls and should have tried to rub my nose in it if I dated a girl more than once. He would then proceed to date her, and it did not take long for her to terminate the relationship. However, even then, I was largely indifferent. I was not close to any of the girls, so if they wanted to date Jacob, it was not an issue for me. Nevertheless, there was one girl that I had a strong interest in. Her name was Sandy Springer, and she was intelligent, witty, and attractive. When I began dating her, I took her to places that Jacob would not have known about. I took her to many places so that Jacob would not be aware of my interest. After several months of dating, we decided to date together. I believed that if Sandy wore my ring, I would be safe. I acknowledged that I was naive. Prom was approaching, and I decided that Sandy and I would attend together. I should have inquired about this immediately, but I am uncertain that it would have resulted in a positive outcome. I purchased the tickets. During lunch, I informed Sandy of this development. She blushed and stated that she had accepted Jacob's invitation to accompany him. I then demanded and received my ring back. Jacob subsequently departed, leaving Sandy in the cafeteria in a state of distress. I chose not to communicate with her further, as I was consumed by a profound sense of anger towards Sandy. I was consumed by a desire to inflict physical harm upon her. Instead, I encountered Pam Taylor, the captain of the cheerleading team, and Jacob supposed in ordinary circumstances, I would have been too intimidated to approach her. "How are you, Pam?" I inquired in a cheerful tone. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied. "And you, Michael?" "I'm fine, thank you," she answered. "I'm fine, too," I said, deciding that I had nothing to lose. "Would you like to go to the prom with me?" I asked. "That's very kind of you," she replied. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, "I meant to ask you if you'd like to go with Jacob." "Oh, I see," she replied, sounding confused. I must have misheard, as I had just heard Jacob ask Sandy Springer. I apologize for my mistake. I am sure I misheard. I left Pam visibly distressed and talking to herself. I later discovered that Michael and Jacob had a significant disagreement. Michael may have caused the breakdown of my relationship with Pam, but I was also responsible for the deterioration of his romance with Sandy. While this was not a complete resolution, it was a step in the right direction. As the day progressed, circumstances improved. Upon my departure from the educational facility, Pam called out to me. I continued to feign innocence, stating, "I'm sorry, I upset you." "Then don't talk nonsense." Pam's eyes narrowed. I subsequently learned that she had been involved in a romantic relationship with Sandy, and that Jacob, a malefactor, had stolen her affections. My ears burned red. I then discovered that I had indeed been wrong. I was merely attempting to retaliate against Jacob. "I am sorry that you were caught." In the crossfire, I was confronted with the reality that I was caught in the middle of a situation I was not prepared to navigate. I was forced to confront the fact that I was being used as a pawn in a larger game. "Are you seriously planning on taking me to the ball?" I began to say, attempting to deflect the situation. From school to the prom, Pam was a constant source of support and encouragement. I recall the expressions on the other guys' faces when they realized she was there with me and Jacob. It was evident that they were taken aback by the unexpected pairing. I believe Jacob initially assumed that Pam might attend the prom as one of the football players' dates. However, it was clear that she was there with me. His eyes widened considerably when he observed our entrance into the hall. Throughout the course of the evening, he attempted to maneuver between Pam and me, and even tried to persuade her to abandon me and join him at his table. However, Pam rebuffed his advances. Jacob repeatedly requested a dance with her, but Pam declined. I empathized with Sandy because she realized that Jacob was exploiting her. Eventually, Sandy became overwhelmed with emotion and requested her parents to take her. I still feel somewhat culpable, but she made her choice and had to live with it after the ball. Jacob was still attempting to gain my attention. I was sufficiently perceptive to recognize that I was playing the role of Cinderella. By tomorrow, Pam would likely resume her relationship with Jacob. However, today I was determined to fulfill my obligations, and that led me to a local motel where I engaged in sexual intercourse with Pam, the most beautiful girl in school, gave me a big kiss and told me what a great guy I was when I dropped her off. I went home feeling elated, but as I had anticipated, by the following Monday, Pam and Jacob were once again an item. Nevertheless, I regarded Jacob with a certain degree of disdain each time we passed in the hallway. Graduation arrived, and most of us departed for our respective colleges. I was sad to leave my hometown and fearful of the future. The future was uncertain, yet I was not regretful about leaving Jacob permanently. I had been accepted into Georgia Tech, while Jacob was attending Harvard. Given that his grandfather had a building named after him at Harvard, it was perhaps inevitable that he would attend that institution. I performed well at Georgia Tech, majoring in software engineering. It was at a party during my freshman year that I met Carol. I will not provide a detailed account of our courtship and subsequent marriage. The specifics of our courtship, romantic involvement, and subsequent marriage are, in truth, not particularly noteworthy. Initially, our relationship was more akin to that of good friends than a romantic partnership. It is perhaps unsurprising, then, that our history lacks a certain degree of memorability. Nevertheless, despite the lack of dramatic moments, there is one aspect of Carol that stands out in my memory: her intelligence. She pursued a degree in business at the University of Georgia, and I found her not only intelligent but also engaging. However, Carol was not strikingly beautiful. She was attractive, but not as aesthetically pleasing as one might expect. In fact, Carol could not be considered as beautiful as Pam, but she was approximately as attractive as Sandy. Despite this, we connected, and we got married 3 months after graduating from university. During the 5 years of our marriage, I considered us quite happy. However, at the time of our marriage, we were not as emotionally invested in each other as we would later become. By the 3rd year of our union, I was in love with Carol, and I believe she felt the same way. We even discussed the possibility of starting a family. However, I was not aware that my wife had initiated this discussion shortly after graduating from school. I began working at Zaba Security Software, was a small startup company. I graduated at the top of my class, so I had the opportunity to choose from a variety of job offers. The 2 brothers from Zaba convinced me that I would be on the executive floor and make a significant income. However, it is important to note that the company was already thriving. The firm was prosperous, and we performed quality work for some of the largest companies in the industry. In addition to our primary responsibilities, we were also compensated with a substantial 6-figure salary. Our reputation grew, but then the brothers decided to offer us a financial incentive to leave Zaba. To my surprise, we were acquired by a company with a similar size and scope as Zaba. That is when I began to experience difficulties. Approximately 3 years after I commenced employment at Zaba, Carol expressed a desire for a change of role. It transpired that Zaba was seeking an office manager, and Carol applied for and was appointed to the position. Initially, I was concerned that we would both be employed by the same company. However, at the outset, everything proceeded smoothly. We had lunch together and drove to work together in the same vehicle. We kissed each other goodbye at the end of the day and proceeded to our respective departments, where we would often have lunch together and then return to our respective duties. I was a senior programmer, which meant that I worked on projects independently and monitored the schedules of the other 8 programmers who reported to me. However, my primary responsibility was to resolve any issues that my team could not address independently. Fortunately, there were the aforementioned issues were few and insignificant, resulting in high customer satisfaction. Our workspace was approximately half the size of a standard basketball court and was aptly named bullpen. We primarily utilized standing desks, and the room was equipped with a multitude of computers, servers, interfaces, and printers. Our facility possessed nearly all the computer equipment one could desire. We placed a premium on ensuring the security of our customer systems, and over the 5 years I have been with the company, we have only received one complaint regarding a customer system that was hacked. However, we were able to trace the hack back to one of the company's own employees, who had disabled the majority of the software we had installed. He was a highly intelligent individual, yet his presence resulted in a significant disruption to our collective rest. In addition to our core team of 9, we had the support of an administrative assistant, Kimberly. She was responsible for preparing any necessary correspondence or memos, maintaining an inventory of supplies, and ensuring their uninterrupted availability. Kimberly also undertook the preparation of our monthly reports and the monitoring of our working hours. Interestingly, the majority of our initial work was conducted using pencil and paper, which allowed the programmer to gain a general understanding before entering data into the computer. Despite the challenges posed by handwritten notes, Kimberly demonstrated remarkable proficiency in deciphering them and transcribing them into digital format. Despite not being her official responsibility, Kimberly prepared the daily files with great proficiency. She also brewed the best coffee for us each morning. Kimberly was approximately 23 or 4 years old. She had short blonde hair, deep hazel eyes, and a very attractive face. However, she was about 50 pounds overweight, which was a significant discrepancy given her height of 5 feet 5 inches. Her physical appearance was marred by a large abdomen and posterior, which detracted from her overall image. I was aware that Kimberly was self-conscious about her weight due to her frequent discussions about her body image. I felt discomfort when she did this, but I understood that it was a coping mechanism for her. My primary concern was Kimberly herself. She was highly proficient in her role and a valuable asset to the team. It was unexpected that Zaba was acquired. The two Zaba brothers did not have the courage to inform the employees directly. Instead, they requested that their lawyer make the announcement. I was displeased because the stock options that the brothers had promised when they went public were no longer available. Additionally, I was uncertain about how to respond to these changes. Carol was as distressed and perplexed by the news as I was, but she was the one who persuaded me to persevere until we could discern the intentions of the new owners. They appointed a senior vice president who initially oversaw the transition process. Initially, he concentrated on the main office. Zaba has grown from 5 employees when I joined to more than 150, according to what I have heard. The person at the new corporate headquarters will start in accounting. It was not until the second day that I learned that the vice president reviewing Zaba security software was none other than Jacob Sanders. However, at the same time I learned that Jacob was leading the transition. I learned that our pay scale would be aligned with that of the parent company. My salary will be increased by $35. Additionally, Carol's salary will be increased by $155. After an initial internal alarm signal prompted me to flee the scene rather than proceed to the nearest exit, Carol persuaded me that it would be unwise to abandon our current positions, particularly in light of the salary increase. Moreover, she highlighted that Jacob's tenure would likely be limited to 6 months. The first significant shift occurred with the hiring of 4 new programmers and their subsequent placement in the bullpen. While they were all Harvard graduates, they demonstrated no discernible superiority over the existing team. In addition to their ineptitude, they exhibited arrogance and a sense of entitlement. All 4 began to harass Kimberly, sometimes. The harassment was sexual on some occasions and, on others, merely mean-spirited. I attempted to reassure them and highlight that their behavior was unacceptable. However, they did not desist. Instead, they continued to harass Kimberly when they believed I was not present. Ultimately, I summoned all 4 of them to the conference room and delivered a strongly worded reprimand. The 4 individuals in question listened to my reprimand but did not cease their disruptive behavior. In addition to harassing Kimberly, they were a source of considerable frustration for my team. Their contributions were not as beneficial as they could have been, and their interpersonal skills were lacking. I eventually decided that their continued presence was untenable, but I lacked the authority to dismiss them. As Jacob was responsible for their employment, I was aware that if I requested their dismissal, he would likely disregard my request. I had observed that Kimberly arrived at the office early each day to prepare coffee and other items. Following my reprimand of the 4 individuals for their mistreatment of Kimberly, I noted that they began arriving even earlier. I came to understand that they were using the time before my arrival to torment the unfortunate girl. It became evident that Kimberly was reaching a point where she was contemplating resignation. I was aware that she held a strong attachment to her role at Zaba and that her employment was crucial to her, so I resolved to arrive early and observe their actions. I concealed myself in the supply cupboard adjacent to I proceeded to the small kitchen, where I readied my cell phone in anticipation of Kimberly's arrival and subsequent coffee preparation. A few minutes later, the 4 individuals in question arrived, and the aforementioned mistreatment commenced. One of the 4, identified as Hey Ball, grinned and addressed Kimberly, inquiring about her breasts. Another, Ted, responded by requesting to see her buttocks. The other 2, Fred and Hey Ball, concurred. I will even help you take off your clothes. I observed tears rolling down Kimberly's face, and I was compelled to intervene. I had sufficient evidence to substantiate my claims, so I came out of the closet. You 4, gather your belongings and leave. You lack the authority to terminate our employment. Fred responded, Mr. Sanders hired us, and he said only he could fire us. It is, in fact, within my power to terminate your employment. However, I possess evidence that you sexually assaulted Kimberly. Therefore, I will elucidate the options available to you. You may either resign immediately or I will submit this video to the authorities. The decision is yours, either you resign or I will notify the police. I will allow you 15 minutes to make a decision. You are free to seek the assistance of Jacob, although I am skeptical that he will intervene to protect you. 15 minutes later, I had successfully pressured all 4 individuals to resign. Their departure was met with expressions of profound relief and gratitude, particularly from Kimberly. I promptly contacted her too. Once the 4 individuals had vacated the premises, I expressed my regret for the distress they had caused. I advised Kimberly that, should a similar incident occur in the future, she should notify me immediately. I also informed her that I held her in high regard and that the 4 individuals in question were of a different caliber. Kimberly expressed her gratitude for my intervention. I informed her that it was part of my job, but that I was not performing it adequately because she had endured an excessive amount of suffering at the hands of those individuals. Mr. Arnold, you are unaware of the significance of this gesture. She stated, her voice quavering, that she was contemplating resignation but was uncertain about her ability to secure alternative employment. Another position that is as satisfactory as the previous one, Kimberly. I am genuinely sorry that you had to endure such an unpleasant experience. I understand that you are distressed. If you require time to recuperate, I will ensure that it does not affect your personal days or sick leave. Thank you, Mr. Arnold. However, I believe that I can contribute to the team's success from this position. After that challenging day, I would prefer to remain at work. He was insistent that I was not doing a satisfactory job, given the circumstances. I informed him that I was merely performing the duties of my position. However, he continued to express dissatisfaction. I was subsequently summoned to Jacob's office after he learned that I had compelled his programmers to resign. He expressed a desire to hire new programmers. As soon as I entered Jacob's office, I demanded that he cease and desist from any further attempts to rehire the 4 individuals in question. I informed him that I possessed compelling evidence indicating that these individuals had sexually assaulted and abused an administrative assistant in our department. I warned him that if he proceeded with the rehiring, he would undoubtedly face legal consequences. The parent company, as well as myself. I do not believe that your superiors will view this in a favorable light. Jacob regarded me with a gaze that suggested he was considering my words, but then he smiled and acquiesced. He attempted to feign ignorance regarding the specifics of the situation, but that evening, I realized that he was lying. Carol returned home and reprimanded me for being disrespectful towards Jacob. She considered me to be discourteous for threatening our superior. At that moment, I should have been aware of the potential danger posed by Jacob's actions, as my instincts warned me of the risks. However, when everything returned to normal at home, I chose to disregard the incident. At the end of the day, I still believed that Carol loved me unconditionally. Had I heeded my intuition, I might not have found myself in prison. However, I was naive and allowed Jacob and my wife to persuade me into a false sense of security. Following the merger, there was no change in my relationship with Carol for a period of 2 months. I subsequently discovered that the company which had acquired us was called Unity Software. It was of a similar size to our company, but its main area of work was government contracts. Zaba had given them the opportunity to enter the commercial market. It should be noted that Jacob's father did not own the company. His family's fortune was made in the production of pipes and wires. However, Jacob's father sold the business while Jacob was still in college. While there are many negative aspects of Jacob's character that could be discussed, it would be inaccurate to label him as incompetent. In fact, he did an excellent job of integrating the 2 companies. Furthermore, he successfully convinced the board of directors to retain the Zaba name, which had a superior reputation. At the time, I was unaware that Jacob had completed his duties. Following the merger of the 2 companies, which was completed in 8 weeks, Jacob began to court my gullible wife in a manner similar to that of Sandy at school. Despite my warnings about him, Jacob was able to win over Carol. She appeared fascinated by Jacob and frequently discussed what a great job he was doing. I repeatedly warned her about Jacob, but she dismissed my concerns, attributing them to jealousy. In her 4th month of pregnancy, Carol announced that she was expecting a child. However, our sexual activity began to decline. It decreased from 3 times a week to once every 2 weeks. Initially, I attributed this change to Carol's pregnancy. However, when our lunches together ceased and Carol eventually ceased commuting with me to work, I realized that this was a significant contributing factor. The culmination of these events was a conversation I had with Carol one morning. She stopped me before leaving for work. I was somewhat surprised to find that she was still at home. Since recently, she had been leaving at least an hour before me. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, inviting me to sit on the sofa. I sat down as I was asked, not realizing that we had to discuss something of such importance at such an early hour. However, what Carol told me was a profound revelation. "I'm sorry to tell you this," Carol said, her eyes hard, "but I fell in love with Jacob, and he fell in love with me." I gazed at her for a considerable period, scrutinizing her countenance. It became evident that she harbored no misgivings. At last, I erupted, "Are you utterly deranged? I informed you that Jacob is and will endeavor to sow discord between us. I am astounded that you would lend credence to his utter nonsense. Hek is not Carol's complexion darkened. He is a benevolent and affectionate individual who comprehends me in a manner that you could never do. I felt my very soul being ravaged. As Carol continued to speak, I became increasingly desperate. I hoped that by referencing the unborn child, I could persuade her to reconsider her actions. I asked her, in a soft voice, whether the child's existence meant anything to her. Carol responded with a forced smile. I was taken aback by her answer. She denied that we had engaged in sexual intercourse for 2 weeks, claiming that I became pregnant as a result of that time. I was overwhelmed with emotion. In a fit of rage, Carol accused me of cheating and having sex with another woman. She asserted that I had no right to dictate what she could do with her own body. I was devastated by her words. I had never felt such a profound sense of betrayal. My father had once advised me to never show a woman that she had hurt you. Maintaining my composure was the most challenging task I had ever faced. However, I managed to pull myself together. He responded with a grin, "You said that Jacob understands you in a way that I never understood." She replied with a laugh, "You're right, he understands. He understands that you are a foolish, gullible individual. It is evident that you are lacking in intelligence, but you have chosen your partner. He is unscrupulous, and you are similarly unethical." Michael. Carol expressed his anger, "This will never happen again." She responded, "I am calm, but I am not convinced. I have decided that I will not be moving out of this house. Instead, Carol will be residing with Jacob in his apartment. I will have to see how that works out." Carol then turned and headed to the bedroom. I found myself in a rather unpleasant situation when I discovered that my wife had been having sexual relations with Jacob for an extended period of time. It was a difficult revelation to process. Jacob, on the other hand, gave me no doubt as to his intentions. I cried all the way to work but eventually pulled myself together. That is an outright falsehood. I was consumed by sheer rage. I resolved to resign and assault Jacob, though not necessarily in that order. Jacob then encountered him as he entered the company premises. He appeared entirely unperturbed and even smiled. I was seized by the notion that it would be eminently Carol-like to assert my authority and confront him. She proceeded to inform me of the pregnancy without first consulting Jacob. As I had anticipated, Jacob had no intention of disclosing this information to me before the birth. Had he done so, it would have resulted in the simultaneous loss of both my wife and child. This would have represented a significant personal defeat. As I approached him, I was overcome with rage. He continued to grin at that moment, and I lost control and punched him. I then proceeded to strike him in the nose and mouth, resulting in immediate bleeding from both wounds. However, I was not yet done. I delivered 2 powerful blows to his groin, followed by an uppercut. As he began to lose consciousness, I left him in a crumpled heap in front of the door. The guards rushed to assist, and I later learned that he had lost 3 teeth and suffered a broken nose. My own condition was far from stable. I sustained injuries to 2 fingers on my left hand. I proceeded to the bullpen and began collecting my personal belongings and papers into a box. Kimberly observed me and I saw the worry and fear on her face. She inquired about the situation. Jacob had initiated a romantic relationship with my wife behind my back, and she was now leaving me for him. I had just physically assaulted him, so I assumed I would be fired. Even if they did not fire me, the remaining staff members were visibly shaken by the incident. In addition to expressing their concern for my well-being, they also voiced apprehension about the potential impact on their own employment. I reassured them that my actions would not affect their future work in any way. Once they were sufficiently comforted and convinced that they would not be adversely affected because of my misstep, I proceeded to pack my belongings. However, before I could complete this task, the police arrived, and I was taken into custody, an outcome I had anticipated but not so soon. While I was being processed, I inquired of Kimberly whether she could pack the remaining items and take them home. After I was photographed, fingerprinted, and provided with paper towels to dry my fingers, I was permitted to make a phone call. However, I was unsure of whom to contact. My parents were on a cruise, and they lived 2 hours away. I was situated in Nashville, approximately 1,000 miles away in San Diego. It was evident that contacting Carol would be futile. I then considered contacting Kimberly, with the hope that she might be able to assist me in locating legal counsel. However, when I attempted to reach Zaba, the receptionist informed me that Kimberly was unavailable due to her absence from the office. I was left with no clear course of action, and I sat in my cell, alternately experiencing feelings of intense anger and wondering how I could possibly regain my wife's trust. One thought continued to persistently occupy my mind: how could Carol have betrayed me in such a callous and heartless manner? As the day progressed, the notion of retribution became increasingly prominent, overshadowing all other considerations. I found myself confined within the confines of the prison, contemplating the unfolding events. It became evident that Jacob had already formulated a plan, and my own challenges were just beginning. While I was aware that Jacob did not anticipate the physical assault he suffered today, I was convinced that he anticipated my response to his betrayal. He had assumed that he could act at his convenience and in a location that would be most advantageous to him. It seems that I have effectively thwarted that aspect of his plan. At 4 p.m., I appeared before the judge for my arraignment. I was assigned a public defender because I did not have a lawyer. To my dismay, my lawyer appeared to be a teenager with a poor complexion. Not only did my lawyer seem inexperienced, but he also appeared to be unfamiliar with the details of my case. He attempted to quickly review the file, but the judge became impatient with him, stating, "It's very simple. Does your client plead guilty or not guilty?" The lawyer appeared taken aback, and I was left to respond. I stated, "Not guilty." The judge then set bail at $2,500, cash or check. I did not have sufficient funds on me and did not carry blank checks, so I informed the judge, "Your Honor, I do not have that much cash and do not carry blank checks." I then asked, "Is there any way I can contact the guarantor?" The judge replied, "My secretary will assist you with this and will inform you of the trial date." Before he could name the next case, I heard a voice behind me say, "I will post bail." I turned around to see Kimberly, who was waving a checkbook. I was surprised to see her in the courtroom and gratified that she had taken the time to come and assist me. I informed Kimberly that I would repay her as soon as I was able to access my funds from the automated teller machine. I reassured Kimberly that I was not concerned about the matter. She said softly, regarding my injured hand, "In the broader context, this injury is relatively minor compared to the pain caused by Carol's betrayal." "Boss," Kimberly said, looking me in the eyes, "I believe your wife is unwise." I acknowledged my administrative assistant's kind gesture with a smile. "Thank you," I said. "That's very kind of you." At that moment, the young man stepped towards me. "Are you Michael Arnold?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "I've been waiting to serve you." I was not entirely surprised. The swiftness with which I was handed the documents indicated that Jacob and Carol had been planning this for some time. It was a further painful blow. I withdrew some money from the ATM and, in a despondent state of mind, attempted to access my account online. However, I was unsuccessful. I contacted the bank, only to be informed that all my accounts had been frozen. This will remain in effect until the court overturns it. At that time, I was unaware that one could file a petition with the court for relief from a complete asset freeze. I also discovered that my other savings account had been frozen. My other financial resources were also frozen, and my credit cards were cancelled. A brief examination of my personal effects revealed that I had $126 in cash, along with a $100 bill concealed within one of the folds of my wallet. It became apparent that Carol and Jacob had collectively frozen all of my financial assets. I informed Kimberly that I was uncertain about the optimal course of action, but that I was at least able to offer to purchase her dinner. However, Kimberly was not convinced. "You are invited to my apartment, where I will prepare dinner for us." I was compelled to concede that Kimberly's proposal was a compelling one. It was illogical for me to expend the limited funds I had on lunches. We proceeded to Zaba, where I retrieved my vehicle, and I accompanied Kimberly to her residence. I was astonished by the extent of her assistance. I was, after all, merely a colleague at work. I was going to repay her in full and then some as soon as I had my finances in order. Over dinner, I felt genuinely remorseful. Not only that, but 2 of my fingers were throbbing with pain. I applied ice to them as soon as I arrived at Kimberly's, but they still hurt after watching me write for a while. The pain was intense. Kimberly finally produced a packet of Percodan, a painkiller she had purchased for a root canal. I took 1 tablet and, after approximately 30 minutes, the pain subsided significantly. However, I was not in a comfortable situation. The medication had a pronounced effect on me. I complained about my situation. I am now completely dependent on medication, have been taped up and tattooed, and am unable to function normally. I am not seeking retribution against Jacob or Carol, as such actions would ultimately be self-defeating. However, I am determined to exact full compensation from these individuals at the earliest opportunity. "Please refer to me as Michael," Kimberly said softly. "I am no longer your superior. Furthermore, your actions today demonstrate that you are a highly valued colleague." Kimberly smiled. "Michael, my mother was unfaithful to my father and subsequently left him for another man. I was forced to live with her, and I resented every moment of it. Her lover was just as objectionable as Jacob. He never married my mother, but they cohabited for a decade until he found someone younger to pursue a relationship with. My father was embittered and sought retribution against my mother for many years. He was imprisoned on multiple occasions and eventually died a broken man. It is unwise to expend one's life attempting to exact vengeance. My father informed me that he deeply regretted allowing my mother's infidelity to devastate him. He expressed a desire to simply I have resolved to move on from this regrettable incident and to forget it. My mother currently resides in a nursing home, where she experiences breathing difficulties due to her long-term smoking habit. I visit her once a week, although I still harbor negative sentiments towards her. Each week, I must endure her lamentations about her decision to leave my father. It is imperative that one does not squander their life in the pursuit of retribution. I informed her that she was likely correct, yet at that moment, I had no intention of allowing those individuals to evade accountability. The resentment remained latent, and I sought retribution for my assistance in clearing the dishes. I informed Kimberly that I had done so. To seek accommodation in a less expensive motel, her immediate response was a firm refusal. She asserted that I would not be leaving and that I would be staying in the spare bedroom. "Kimberly, I have come to recognize you as a beacon of hope in the otherwise bleak landscape of my life. I am no longer in a position to impose myself upon you. Firstly, this is not," and she was insistent. "Secondly, if I slept in the spare room, I could go to work the following day and discover what was going on." Kimberly's perspective made more sense than my own, so I accepted her invitation around mid-morning the next day. Kimberly called me to inform me that I had indeed been fired. She then instructed me to turn on her computer and type out an email to HR. I was instructed to type an email to HR, instructing them to send my latest check to her address. Shirley, the head of human resources, was uncertain about the company's obligation to pay for my vacation and sick leave. However, she believed that this information should be included in the letter. After all, the courts had frozen all my money. I informed Shirley that the court order only applies to bank accounts. Therefore, the letter should be drafted as soon as possible. I followed Kimberly's suggestion and received a fax stating that I would receive a check for $4 in a couple of days. Furthermore, the document indicated that the company should verify state legislation to ascertain whether they are obliged to remunerate employees for accrued vacation time or sick leave. It was subsequently determined that such payments were not mandatory. Nevertheless, the employee in question received a sum of nearly $5,000. The outcome was a resounding success. Upon her return, Kimberly informed me that Jacob was absent that day, but Carol was present and expressed displeasure at my role in damaging her relationship with her boyfriend. This turn of events amused both Kimberly and me. I opted to remain at Kimberly's residence until I received my remuneration, which occurred during this period. Upon actively seeking employment and preparing a resume, I discovered that Jacob and Carol had effectively excluded me from the job market due to my background in cybersecurity. Despite the absence of a felony conviction, I was unable to secure employment opportunities. Upon receiving my first paycheck, I transferred the funds to Kimberly's account for deposit. I was reluctant to open a new account in her name, given the risk of it being frozen. When I informed Kimberly of my intention to rent a property in my own name, she expressed concern. She highlighted that without a checking account, it would be challenging for me to secure a rental agreement. Furthermore, if they were to conduct a credit check at this time, it would likely reflect my financial challenges. I was urged to remain in the residence until I secured new employment. Ultimately, I consented to the arrangement, and the attorney I retained took on my case after I made a down payment of $2,000. The attorney's initial petition to the court was granted, allowing me access to a reasonable amount of money from our combined checking and savings accounts. This sum was sufficient to maintain a basic standard of living, including the payment of legal fees. After residing in Kimberly's apartment for 8 days, I determined that it was time to relocate. I secured an apartment within her complex. On that Saturday, I proceeded to pay the requisite deposit for the apartment complex. Simultaneously, I procured a modest assortment of furniture for my new residence. I extended an invitation to Kimberly for a dinner engagement, which she accepted. During our meal at the Olive Garden, I conducted a detailed observation of her. She possessed an angelic countenance, yet the additional 50 to 100 pounds she carried detracted from her overall appearance. It became evident that Kimberly was highly self-conscious about her weight. I was conscious of her weight, and I had an idea that I hoped she would not find offensive. I considered how best to present this proposal. I had recently learned that there is a gym in our complex. I said casually, I would like to use it, but I would really like to have someone to go with. She asked if I was interested in being seen with her. She moved her hands up and down. Her abdomen was visibly distended, indicating a surplus of adipose tissue. Affirmative, I replied, I am interested. I then inquired as to whether she would prefer to avoid any association with an individual with a criminal record. My inquiry elicited precisely the response I had anticipated. Kimberly was reluctant to attend the gym because she was concerned about being observed in a state of undress. However, she was also reluctant to offend me, so she consented to the arrangement. We established a schedule of 4 visits per week at 6 o'clock in the morning. As there was never anyone there after the first week, Kimberly realized she didn't have to worry about being embarrassed and began to enjoy the sessions. I continued to look for work, but no one in the security software industry was interested in me, at least until a decision was made in my case. In a conversation with a lawyer, I was informed that there was a high probability that I would be found guilty of assault. However, the lawyer was careful to never tell me what to say or lie. He did, however, tell me that if I had gone into a blind rage because of my boss and wife's infidelity, that could be considered mitigating. If I am unable to recall the precise details of the incident, the court will undoubtedly consider this in its deliberations on the day of the trial. I was grateful for Kimberly's support in taking time off from work to accompany me. When my lawyer learned that Judge Parker would be presiding over the case, he advised me to request a closed court hearing. The judge, not the jury, has the authority to make this decision. My lawyer explained that this would satisfy the judge and, moreover, that Judge Parker is known to hold a particular disdain for those who engage in unfaithful behavior. The prosecutor presented 3 witnesses who had observed or heard about the alleged attack. My lawyer cross-examined these witnesses. The witnesses were then subjected to rigorous examination, which compelled them to admit that they did not witness the commencement of the altercation or hear any threats directed at Jacob. They were unable to provide a definitive assertion that Mr. Sanders did not initiate the physical confrontation. Jacob was subsequently called to the stand, where he proceeded to narrate his account. Jacob provided a comprehensive account of the incident, which he described as an unprovoked attack. He unequivocally denied any involvement in the physical altercation and then proceeded to enumerate the injuries he sustained. My lawyer then inquired about his relationship with my wife. Jacob provided false testimony, stating that he and my wife were merely friends. When questioned about the pregnancy, he informed the judge that, to the best of his knowledge, the child was mine. After Jacob concluded his testimony, he smiled at me as he returned to his seat. I was the sole witness called to testify on my behalf. The lawyer's sole objective was to have me describe the events leading up to the alleged attack and my recollection of the incident. I informed the lawyer that my wife had. I was particularly astonished when my wife informed me that she was seeking a divorce in order to marry my boss. I was even more taken aback when she revealed that the child I believed to be my own was, in fact, Jacob's. I attempted to explain that she was the love of my life, but she had treated me with such disregard that I felt like an old pair of shoes. I then informed the judge that I recalled seeing Jacob at the door and that he had smiled at me in a way that made me feel uneasy. After that, I lied and said that I did not remember anything until I was at my. The prosecutor attempted to obfuscate my memories by questioning me about the sequence of events. I was so enraged that morning that I had no recollection of the time. As he pressed me for details, it became increasingly evident that I had no memory of the incident. He then asked me if I believed the court would accept my testimony. I informed the prosecutor that on my commute to work, I had experienced a headache and visual disturbances, which were, in fact, accurate. I reiterated that my recollection of the incident was limited to Jacob's smirking expression. He then inquired if I was certain that the child my wife was carrying was Jacob's. I replied that I could only attest to what my wife had told me. Carol was not present in court because no one had subpoenaed her. My attorney surmised that my wife would be a wild card. The judge, Parker, delivered a speech in which he expressed his opinion that the prosecutor had also felt the same way. After this, the judge retired to his chambers to consider the verdict, but returned 10 minutes later. Parker stated that Arnold had been betrayed in the most cowardly and shameful manner. It is evident that this blow to Arnold's nervous system led to serious mental disorders. Consequently, Parker found Arnold to be temporarily insane. Not guilty was the verdict. Jacob, seated nearby, emitted a low growl, prompting Judge Parker to strike his gavel with a resounding blow. The judge's intention was to hold Jacob accountable for contempt of court. The sight of Jacob, his face flushed with anger, brought a sense of satisfaction. Jacob had emerged triumphant over me, albeit temporarily. I was consumed by a desire for vengeance. However, having narrowly avoided jail time, I had to temporarily set aside any thoughts of retribution. I was uncertain as to how I might retaliate. Jacob was waiting for me. I considered pushing him to attack me, but I was unsure of the outcome, so I instead called the bailiff. I should not have been within 150 meters of this man, but he was preventing me from leaving. The bailiff then informed Jacob that he should move on. Jacob responded by shouting that this was not the end and that he would sue me. This was troubling to me, so I inquired of my counsel, "Can he sue me?" "Yes," he replied. "Any person can sue anyone else." He then smiled, "But his case is weak. If you really want to pull the rug out from under him," I continued, "don't accept anything other than an offer to pay for his medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance." I then proceeded to draft a letter to his office, which I addressed to the relevant parties. Jacob did not respond or file a lawsuit. The evening after the trial, it had been just over 9 weeks since Carol had dropped that bombshell. Despite my continued resentment, the court victory provided a degree of solace, prompting me to extend an invitation to Kimberly for a dinner engagement. I also had news of a personal nature to share with her. We agreed to meet at a modest Italian restaurant that evening. However, due to unforeseen circumstances in my previous department, Kimberly was unable to attend. She informed me that her work schedule had been extended due to the need to acclimate to my absence. Kimberly was still overweight, but it was evident that she had lost weight, and the dress she wore was particularly flattering. I stood and kissed her on the cheek. "You look great. Have you lost weight?" "Yes, I lost 15 pounds. I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier, but you're wearing those oversized sweatshirts and sweatpants." "I know, but like I said, you look great." The restaurant was small and cozy. This was the ideal place for a date. While couples often choose this restaurant for a date, I did not perceive it as such. Instead, I viewed it as an opportunity for two close friends to meet. I invited you to join me for dinner today to celebrate my recent legal victory and to share some news. I have accepted a position with Sable Security in Jacksonville, Florida. Kimberly expressed joy at the news. She then inquired about my future employer, asking if I would be working for Sable Security in Jacksonville. I informed her that I was not sure if they had an office in the area. Kimberly expressed concern, suggesting that I might have to relocate to Jacksonville. He was taken aback when Kimberly's eyes widened and tears began to stream down her cheeks. I had assumed you would be pleased for me, I said, perplexed. I am gratified that you have secured employment, Kimberly replied, her eyes still glistening with tears, but you will be 600 miles away from me. Kimberly, you previously advised me not to allow my wife's infidelity to consume me with hatred. She nodded, her eyes still brimming with tears. I now understand that the only way forward is to create some distance between us. Between Carol and me, and let time do the rest. I understand, Kimberly said, wiping her eyes. I'll just miss you. I really enjoyed having a friend. I'm just a phone call away, I said, trying unsuccessfully to cheer her up. But I'll find out. Do you truly desire my visit? Is it? She inquired. Of course, I replied promptly. Do you recall that I, too, lack companions in Jacksonville? She asked. Indeed, I answered. When will you depart? Kimberly finally inquired. In 45 days, I replied. But before that time, I have a multitude of tasks to complete. I must find housing, open a new bank account, take a lie detector test, submit to a background check, and pass other tests. I believe it will require at least 2 trips to complete all of this. Once these tasks were completed, my mood improved somewhat. However, I observed that Kimberly was not eating much. I surmised that she was still somewhat distressed. Indeed, as the time for my departure drew nearer, Kimberly became increasingly despondent. It appeared that she was hoping for a deeper connection between us. I must admit that I was perplexed by this, as I felt that Kimberly could have performed much better than I could. I spent my last evening in Kimberly's apartment before starting my new job. In the apartment, she prepared a meal of considerable quality, accompanied by a chocolate cake bearing the inscription, "I'll miss you." After assisting her with the subsequent cleaning tasks, we engaged in the viewing of television programming until the designated bedtime. I initiated a kiss on the lips before proceeding to the guest room. At night, I became aware of a shifting of the bed and the presence of an individual's body in close proximity to mine, still in a state of partial wakefulness. I subsequently discerned that it was Kimberly, and she was in a state of undress. I proceeded to remove my undergarment and lift my t-shirt. I removed my shirt and turned to face Kimberly. She pressed her body against mine, and I felt her silky smooth skin and soft breasts pressed against my chest. It was a pleasurable sensation. I kissed her on the lips, and she responded with passionate intensity. When I clung to Kimberly, she sobbed. I began to worry that I had hurt her or that she was angry that I took advantage of her. I inquired, almost in a state of panic, whether I had offended her. No, she replied, I'm just so happy. She then laid her head on my chest and stated, I've already had sex with 5 or 6 men, but this is the first time I've made love. We remained in this position for several minutes before Kimberly slid off my bed, took 2 steps towards the door, and then she returned to me and leaned over to kiss me. She inquired as to whether I would be willing to spend the night in her bed. I was agreeable, as my bed was in a state of considerable moisture. Additionally, spending the night with Kimberly seemed an optimal way to conclude my time in this city. After breakfast, I conducted a final inspection of my vehicle to ascertain that I had all the necessary items. I then turned to Kimberly and kissed her. In response, I received perhaps the most passionate kiss I have ever experienced. Unfortunately, it was time for me to leave. As my car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Kimberly sitting on the side of the road. She buried her head in her hands and began to sob. I was reluctant to leave her, but I knew it was the best course of action. I still loved Carol, and therefore I was damaged. It was a somewhat amusing turn of events, as I had ceased to dwell on the prospect of revenge. Instead, I experienced a profound sense of sadness. Jacksonville proved to be an intriguing city, yet I did not have the opportunity to explore it extensively. I immersed myself in my new professional role, working extended hours not merely to compensate for lost time but also to distract myself from thoughts of Carol. I maintained communication with Kimberly, who often appeared cheerful when she received my call and expressed profound sadness when our conversation concluded. I had feared this outcome. Approximately 1 month after their divorce was finalized, I learned that Carol and Jacob had married. I was also informed that Carol had given birth to a daughter. This news did not elicit the same level of excitement I had anticipated. Perhaps I was beginning to overcome the resentment and humiliation I had previously experienced. I no longer experienced the distressing phenomenon of insomnia. Similarly, I rarely awoke in the morning with feelings of depression due to the absence of Carol in my bed. In March, Kimberly came to spend 4 days with me. Given that we had not seen each other for a considerable period, we were uncertain about the nature of our relationship. We circumvented the issue of sexual intimacy, and we did not engage in sexual intercourse until the final 2 nights. The intensity of these experiences was comparable to the initial encounter, was marked by a distinct lack of physical contact. However, approximately 1 year later, I was informed that I could procure the services of an administrative assistant for my team. Sable Security was considerably larger than my previous employer, while Zaba had one dedicated team for cybersecurity. In contrast, we had 6. Over the course of this year, I progressed from a junior member of one team to its leader. As the decision regarding the hiring of an individual was mine, I promptly contacted Kimberly. I had barely sufficient time to provide her with a brief overview of the position before she expressed her desire to accept the role. When I met Kimberly at the airport, I was taken aback by her impressive demeanor. I anticipated that she would be highly regarded, and indeed, she was. However, her primary objective was to reach me, and she proceeded to do so with great haste. She threw herself into my arms and kissed me with such passion that my knees went weak. The plan was for Kimberly to stay with me until she found her own apartment. I had assumed that the search would only take a week, but it lasted for weeks. There was something wrong with every apartment she looked at. I did not complain because Kimberly and I slept in the same bed. It is interesting to note that during the year and a half that I resided in Jacksonville, my thoughts about Carol diminished. With the advent of Kimberly, my thoughts about her ceased entirely. However, I was aware that Kimberly would eventually relocate, and I anticipated that with trepidation. 5 weeks later, I inquired about her apartment situation, and she began to weep. I was utterly astonished. I was aware that I had caused her distress. I was perplexed by her question. I had apologized, yet she seemed uncertain. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I would like you to stay forever, but I understand that one day you will want to leave. I need time to prepare. I would ask you to marry me," I continued, "but you are too good for me." "That's not true," Kimberly interjected. "I have held a profound affection for you since the inception of my tenure at Zaba. I would readily offer you my hand in matrimony." However, circumstances shifted significantly on that very day when we embarked on our search for an engagement ring and began to plan our nuptials. Despite my trepidation that Kimberly might ultimately depart for another, my intense feelings for her compelled me to take the plunge. 6 months later, Kimberly and I were, 1 year later, Kimberly gave birth to a son, whom we named Mikey Jr. 18 months after that, we had a daughter, Charlotte. I was promoted at Sable to lead all 8 cybersecurity teams. Conversely, Kimberly elected to remain at home around Christmas. 3 years later, I was summoned to a meeting at which I was informed that Sable was planning to acquire Zaba security software. I was to be part of a team that would conduct due diligence before the acquisition was completed. During the years that Kimberly and I were married, Kimberly's mother died and my parents retired. They relocated to Jacksonville to be closer to their grandchildren and me, taking them on as babysitters. I intend to use the week too. The journey was to be a brief respite. I also sought to utilize Kimberly's expertise as an administrative assistant to assist me in my investigation. This approach allowed me to bring Kimberly to work with me daily, where she could observe some of the individuals she collaborated with, and we could discreetly take extended lunches together during my week in Nashville. I gained 4 insights. First, I learned that this facility was the sole location where Zaba conducted cybersecurity operations. Secondly, Jacob was promoted to the position of Chief Operating Officer, while Carol assumed the role of Senior Project Manager. Thirdly, despite my personal regard for Jacob, I found him to be an exemplary manager of the company. From my perspective, all of his actions were of the highest caliber, and the last I knew was that Zaba was holding their Christmas party on Friday night, which I was required to attend. Apart from our team's initial introductions to Jacob, I had no further contact with him. Additionally, throughout the entire week, I did not have any contact with Carol. However, circumstances shifted significantly at the Christmas party, which Zaba had arranged to be held at a rented ballroom at the Hilton DoubleTree in downtown Nashville. The venue was tastefully decorated, with tables arranged along the dance floor and a group of 5 individuals seated in one of the corners. Musical accompaniment was provided in the form of soft Christmas carols and background music, with occasional interludes of older songs. Following the dinner and speeches, the attendees were invited to dance. Additionally, a bar was available for attendees, which was met with great enthusiasm. As more individuals arrived, Jacob, Carol, and several members of Zaba's senior staff were present to greet the Sable team. Despite initial reservations, I found that my concerns were unwarranted. Jacob, whom I had previously encountered, appeared to be largely unchanged, and Carol, although appearing slightly more mature, still exuded a certain charm. I was somewhat surprised to find that I did not experience any particular emotion when they approached us. "Mike, I am gratified that you were able to attend this evening's gathering." Jacob, who was visibly nervous, inquired as to whether our previous disagreements might impede the acquisition. I assured him that these issues were now resolved and that he should not be concerned. He then turned his attention to a woman who was accompanying him. Jacob smiled broadly, taking Kimberly's hand. "This is my beloved wife, Kimberly," he said, kissing her on the cheek. Jacob's smile faded as he looked at Kimberly and then at me. Kimberly smirked at Jacob, saying, "Don't you remember me?" Jacob replied, "I was Michael's administrative assistant when he worked at Zaba. I transitioned from my previous role to become Michael's wife, a significant career advancement." Jacob's eyes narrowed further, yet he attempted to maintain a cheerful demeanor. However, her demeanor seemed insincere, given the considerable time that had elapsed. "My apologies, I did not recognize you," Jacob continued to observe her with a discerning gaze. Carol then proceeded to engage in conversation with both Kimberly and me. She subsequently moved closer to me and stated, "Michael, you look very good." She then took my hand and said, "Your wife is gorgeous." I informed her that I was unaware that Michael and Kimberly had married. She informed me that they had been married for 7 years and that their anniversary was in March. Kimberly then approached us and embraced both Carol and me. She said, "Both you and Carol." "You both look well," I replied, then inquired as to the well-being of Carol's daughter. Initially, Carol seemed reluctant to respond, but then smiled and replied, "She's doing very well. Tammy is in the 2nd grade, and her brother Jacob Jr. is in kindergarten." "Do you have children?" I inquired of Kimberly. "Mickey Jr. goes to kindergarten, and Charlotte is still at home with me," she replied. "They are both doing very well, thank you for asking." After that, Carol moved on, and soon after, Kimberly and I walked away to find our table. The food was excellent, and the speeches were fortunately short. Sable's CEO simply reassured everyone that no one's job was in jeopardy, at least for the next year, and that he was looking forward to the merger. When dinner was over, the music started, and Kimberly and I did a few laps around the stage. It seems that today's young people have missed the opportunity to learn how to dance. Slow dancing with your loved one is such an intimate thing, it can connect two people in much the same way that sex can. One evening, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and saw Carol standing there. Kimberly turned to see who I was looking at, and her eyes narrowed as she realized it was my ex. My wife, Carol, smiled sweetly at Kimberly. "May I ask your husband to dance?" Kimberly looked at me and then smiled at Carol. "Only if you remember where to return it," I said, taking Carol out onto the dance floor. We danced in silence for approximately 1 minute. "Michelle," I began, "I just want to apologize to you for what Jacob and I did back then." She replied with sincere remorse in her voice, "You didn't deserve any of this." Upon discovering that I was pregnant with Jacob's child, I came to the realization that our relationship had reached its conclusion. Consequently, I opted for a swift and straightforward dissolution of our partnership. I did not consider the potential emotional distress this decision might cause you. In retrospect, I recognize that my decision to pursue a hasty and comprehensive separation was misguided. The approach I employed was neither constructive nor conducive to healing. I acknowledge that my actions were influenced by Jacob's persuasive tactics, which I now recognize as inappropriate. I allowed myself to be persuaded to pursue a course of action that was neither constructive nor conducive to healing. Over the dam now, it doesn't matter. We all moved on. Besides, I kind of got something out of it. I beat the crap out of Jacob. Apparently, I didn't do much damage to his testicles because you had a second child. Carol giggled at this. We danced a little in silence. I decided to bury the hatchet between us once and for all. Listen, Carol. I began hesitantly. I admit I was very sad when you left me for Jacob. It took me many months to come to terms with your loss. However, we are both now happily married and have children. I believe that this was meant to happen. Carol burst out laughing. Upon looking at her face, I saw a tear running down her cheek. Did I say something wrong? Carol just shook her head no. Michael, you did not say anything bad. It is just not what you think at first glance. Everyone thinks that we are the perfect couple. They are perceived as the ideal couple. Initially, I would have concurred with this assessment. However, Jacob is a Machiavellian manipulator who exploits individuals and then discards them. I am aware that he engaged in infidelity on numerous occasions, yet he is not as astute as he believes. Each time I discover that he has been unfaithful, I reciprocate by engaging in infidelity. It is a rather unfortunate way to live. I am aware that Carol observed this and noted that I should have terminated the relationship. I discovered Jacob's true character, but I was too ashamed to acknowledge it. Michael, I am pleased you have found happiness, but I will always regret leaving you. You and my children are the best thing that ever happened to me. We conversed until the song ended. Carol then escorted me back to my table and thanked Kimberly for allowing me to borrow her. Kimberly and I danced our final dance. The following day, I came to the realization that her counsel from years prior had indeed been accurate. If I remained fixated on Carol, she could potentially become a significant obstacle in my life. It is likely that the adage, when God closes a door, he opens another, holds true. Following the loss of Carol, I experienced a profound sense of devastation. However, through this adversity, I was presented with the opportunity to connect with Kimberly, and I cannot fathom a life without her. Given this context, I am curious to know the nature of your conversation with Carol, Kimberly. I inquired as to whether she was attempting to rekindle our relationship. I responded with laughter and an embrace, as if she had any chance of doing so. Kimberly then rested her head on my shoulder and advised me to remember that I am a loyal woman. She added that she would be forced to sever our relationship if I ever attempted to leave her. She had only broached the subject because she had heard that not everything was going well in their marriage. I was informed of the same information, and I concurred. However, I hypothesized that they will remain together for the sake of their offspring once they reach adulthood. I would not wager on the longevity of this marriage. Subscribe to our channel so that your partner does not engage in infidelity and proceed to listen to the subsequent narrative, as this one is comparatively insignificant in comparison to the next.